One of my favorite writers and thinkers is David Goldman, author of the book How Civilizations Die. One of the interesting things in that book is his inspection of Iran and how it has one of the lowest fertility rates in history. The country is lacking confidence, and this is a theme that David returns to in his column in the Asia Times. He joins us now via Skype from New York. David, great to see you again. I find it very interesting to look through the prism of demographics and birth rates to help explain some of the political things we see around the world. You always surprise me by reminding me that Iran is in a demographic catastrophe. People just aren't having kids. It has the world's highest rate of sexually transmitted diseases, which is a surprise to me, one of the highest rates of drug use. People have sort of given up on life, haven't they?
Persia is a soon-to-be ex-nation as trends go. Of course, things could turn around. I think if you got rid of the horrible theocratic regime and had a democratic replacement for it, Persian confidence might return. But as things stand, there really won't be much left of Iran in 100 years. In 30 years, the place will collapse because a third of their people will be over the age of 60. That's never happened in a poor country, which can't sustain that kind of elderly dependency. So when the Iranian regime does things that look nuts to us, remember, they're looking into an abyss. They are in an existential crisis. They're deeply provoked, and that's part of what makes them so crazy.
You know, when I think of the Muslim world, I think of teeming fertility. I think of places like the Gaza Strip with, 4 children per mom or something like that. So it's hard for me to imagine that a very theocratic, fundamentalist country like Iran doesn't have the kind of childbirth rates that you would expect from such fundamentalists. Obviously, there's a disconnect between the ruling ayatollahs, who probably, who have taken steps. They've stopped subsidizing birth control. They have subsidies for more kids, and just the millions of Iranians who obviously are not confident about their future as a nation. It's just such a disconnect between the Iranians underneath and the ayatollahs on top. How does this feed into their nuclear program and their bellicose threats towards Israel and the West? How is that explained in part through this fertility crisis?
Ezra, when this horrible regime falls, as it eventually must fall, I think we'll find out that there are no more Muslims in Iran than there were communists in Russia in 1989, outside of the top leadership. This is a country which has become secular, as all Muslim countries do, by one great transformation, and that's education of women. We see a nearly perfect correlation between the level of education of women and the birth rate in Muslim countries. So places like Pakistan, which are 50% illiterate, are still having 4 children per female. Countries like Iran, which is the first Muslim country to achieve full female adult literacy, are having maybe 1.6 children per female. That's the level of Western Europe. Algeria, Turkey, Tunisia, other Muslim countries which have nearly full female literacy, are all below replacement in terms of demographics. Now, what does it mean in terms of the Iranian leadership's outlook? They're looking at the disappearance of traditional Persian life and lack of motivation of their people to persist in the modern world. And in response to that, they're offering a new imperial identity, or if you will, a revived imperial identity. And the central point of that is for Iran to be able to champion the cause of Muslims against this alleged alien colonial intrusion in the Middle East, namely Israel. The more they become fixated on imperial ambitions, the more they're obsessed with the Jews and the need to destroy Israel.
Now, this you make a very interesting comparison. This is the first time I had seen it. You looked at Nazi Germany in the 30s and their birth rate, which was shockingly low to me. I didn't know that Germany had such a low birth rate in the 30s. Obviously, Hitler was focused on that and rebuilding the Aryan stock and the Aryan nation. How did you make a comparison there? And I don't want to try and rephrase it because you said it so perfectly. How did Hitler's hatred for the Jews, however, it was animated by Germany's plummeting birth rate. How is that comparable to Iran's hatred of the Jewish state and its plummeting birth rate? What are the similarities there?
When Hitler talked about the extinction of the Aryan race and the end of Germany, he was not entirely outside of reality. Before World War I, Germany had one of the highest population growth rates in the world. Germans were having 6 or 7 children, and Germany had increased its population by 60% between the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and the outbreak of the First World War. But after the defeat, the demoralization was so great that Germany fell immediately well below replacement to about 1.7 children per female. And that demoralization looked to Hitler like the end of Germany. And in his twisted mind, he felt that establishing the idea of a German master race, of German superiority, was the way to rally the German people in this apocalyptic worldview he had. And the great obstacle to this sense of German chosenness, if you will, was the old chosen people. Germany couldn't be the Herrengeschlecht, the master race, without getting rid of the old chosen people. So his anti-Semitism was purely an ideological response to his sense of threatened national extinction, which was not entirely hallucination. The hallucination was the idea that a Jewish conspiracy stood in the way of Germany's return to greatness.
So in a way, Nazism's master race, their racial supremacy, is analogous to Iran's religious theocratic supremacy and the Untermenschen, the despised race of the Jews. It happens to be the same here, except for it's a country, it's an external country that is regarded as the great insult to all of Islam. How do ordinary Iranians think about this? Because of course Israel and Iran were great friends, even allies, for decades under the Shah. There were, at one point in time, hundreds of thousands, maybe even more than 1 million Persian Jews. There was a great history, even going back to Cyrus, I suppose. How do ordinary Iranians feel about Jews? Has some of the hatred of the Ayatollahs trickled down?
Well, we don't know because we can't rely on the data we get out of Iran, but given the massive demonstrations against the regime in 2009, I think it's fair to say the regime is not entirely popular. I don't know what ordinary Iranians think, but in the twisted view of the regime and the Revolutionary Guard's fanatics, Islam is the true religion given by the Prophet Muhammad because Jews and Christians who had been given the true revelation willfully distorted it out of their own perverseness. So here we have the despised Jews who had the revelation, rejected it. Muhammad had to come and restore the original revelation. And now the Jews have returned to their homeland with their capital at Jerusalem, seem to be prosperous. They're a pocket superpower. They're doing well in every realm of life. What does that mean from the standpoint of the credibility of apocalyptic Islam? It's something that it's a cognitive dissonance that the fanatics can't absorb. So getting rid of Israel, humiliating the Jews, is a sine qua non of Islamist identity.
Isn't that? I see your point. They have to deal with this anomaly because it's the one it's the one fact that disproves their theory. Let me ask you one last question because I read your piece. I think it was in the Asia Times, which talked about Hitler. Was he insane? Was he crazy? Well, he may have been crazed and obsessed, and that may have caused him to make decisions that he otherwise wouldn't have. But just because someone's crazy doesn't mean they can't be deadly or dangerous. And I find it interesting because John Kerry and Barack Obama have dealt with the fact that Iran is irrational in its hatred. That's what they call it. But an irrational hatred doesn't mean that a country is any less dangerous. Help me out here. Compare Hitler's personal obsession with the Jews with the Iranian leadership's personal obsession with the Jews and the fact that we're giving them a pathway to a nuclear bomb. Just talk about this because I'm having some problem re-articulating your great points in the column.
Neither Germany nor Iran could accept the humiliation that Germany felt in the 1930s after the Versailles Treaty, and that Iran feels now after its catastrophic decline from the status of world power to the status of backwater. They have to invent an enemy to explain their problems. In the case of Hitler, he was, in a sense, insane if you define insanity by consistently acting against self-interest. Germany gained nothing strategically by persecuting the Jews. Killing the Jews took effort, took resources away from the war effort, and it drove out some of Germany's most talented scientists. Remember, Albert Einstein spent World War I happily in Berlin as a loyal German subject. And before World War II, he convinced Franklin Roosevelt to go all out for the Manhattan Project. So, to put it cruelly, there's no way Hitler could have lost that war if only he had had the Jews on his side.
I've heard that joke before, and it's a great point. David Goldman, always a pleasure and an education. I love reading his stuff on the Asia Times.